I spoke at last year's conference, and I loved it. This is such a wonderful event. It's so nice to see such a group of people. And later on I'm going to be talking about connections. And I was thinking earlier, in terms of a sense of community. I think this particular event is amazing for creating that, and it reminds us why it's so important. But I'll come back to that in a little bit. So the other thing is Kirsten from Digby Brown asked me to speak on the topic of why movement and connection matter. And my first reaction was, Kirsten, I'm not a movement guy. I'm not a physiotherapist and so on. But anyway, Kirsten's very persuasive. So I said, okay, I'll do it. And I've really enjoyed just sort of putting some notes together for this initial session. But what I'm also saying is I think I'm essentially warm-up guy for Leanne and Danielle, who are coming on after. I'm going to tell you actually how it should be done. But I guess what I wanted to do is really just to think about I'm a neuropsychologist, so I want to think about neuropsychology and brain and cognition and mental health, and just illustrate why, from that perspective, that things like movement and connection matter. We'll talk about movement, we'll talk about connection, and then highlight the importance of actually combining these two. So I think it's worth thinking about brain injury and how we think about the consequences of brain injury. So when you have a brain injury, you may have your cognitive functions affected. So your memory, your language, your perception, your executive functions, your concentration, and so on. Your emotional systems may be directly affected by the brain injury or impacted by the consequences and living with the consequences of brain injury. Your physical functioning may be affected as well. And of course, all of these factors and many others will then influence one's ability to complete activities of daily living, to go back to work, to engage in leisure, relationships, and so on. And when we think about the consequences of brain injury, we think about it in this whole way. We can think about the direct consequences of damage to particular parts of the brain. But what we're most interested in, certainly from a rehabilitation perspective, is thinking about how that makes it difficult to complete and to do the sorts of things that are important to you after a brain injury or were important to you before the brain injury. And in a sense, when I think about this, I think about that wider sense of well-being. So we can also think about how is somebody's well-being affected after a brain injury, because all of these factors will influence one's ability to engage in or experience positive emotion, to be engaged in activities, to achieve things, to engage in the sorts of things that gave you meaning before the brain injury, and relationships. And when we think about well-being, I refer to this framework. It's a model of well-being, or sometimes people use the word happiness, but it's a broader idea of well-being. So as I said, the PERMA framework talks about positive emotions, about engagement, positive relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. And what's useful about this is, in a sense, if one thinks about many of the consequences of having a brain injury, if these are the things that, before our brain injury, gives us that sense of well-being, many of these things are vulnerable to being affected after a brain injury. So one of the key tasks for us all is to support people, to actually enable people to achieve in these areas, to have a sense of positive emotion, of engagement, of positive relationships, meaning, and accomplishment, but in the context of a brain injury. And so I'm going to be talking a little bit just specifically about things like movement and connection, but linking them back to that sense of that framework for thinking about well-being. So when we think about movement and connection, well, what we know is actually they're good for brain health generally. I noticed the Brain Health Scotland stand is out in the hall there. And Brain Health Scotland has been interested in a sense in supporting all of us, particularly as we age, and thinking about just health generally. But for brain health, there are a number of factors which we know from research and from their evidence are good for brain health. And amongst those are staying connected. So participation with things with other people, staying connected to those people that are important to you, being engaged in social activities, and movement. There are other things as well on the list, but today we're thinking about both movement and that importance of staying connected. So as I said, I wanted to just sort of think about, okay, well, what's the research? This is great, but what's the research evidence that actually says that these things are important for us generally, and then particularly in the context of having had a brain injury? So movement. So what's the evidence that movement, or I'm thinking here about exercise, I guess, is good for cognition, for mood, for well-being, and for recovery after a brain injury? So if we look at the scientific literature, both studies that have looked at this in animals, but also the general population, there is now a wide body of evidence. So people write systematic reviews and literature reviews and pull the evidence together. And when you pull that evidence together, the evidence is pretty strong that exercise is not just good for your physical health, but exercise is good for cognition. It's good for mood, in the sense it tends to reduce depression and anxiety. And so it's good for overall well-being. But beyond that, we can understand some of the mechanisms. Why might it be good for cognition or for mood and well-being? Well, actually, what we know is that exercise supports things like an increase in brain-derived neurotrophic factor, so BDNF. So BDNF is an important protein in the brain, which actually supports synapse function, supports the generation of new neurons, and just general sort of neuron brain cell health, if you like. We need BDNF for that. And exercise is something which supports, maintains good BDNF levels. And similarly, exercise will also support neurogenesis, so for a long time we didn't think about new neurons growing in the brain, but we know in certain particular areas of the brain, particularly the hippocampal area, which is really important for memory, that things like exercise can actually improve neurogenesis, synaptogenesis, and gliogenesis. So, in a sense, making these cells that are important. We know that exercise is important and just good for our vascular health. Ty this morning was in the first session, for those of you here, was talking about stroke and that sort of the vascular system, and he was talking about the sort of after a stroke trying to sort of save particular parts of the brain by ensuring that the brain is perfused. So we know that actually exercise is good for keeping our vascular health. So if we want good brain health, then we need to have good vascular health. And the great thing about all these things essentially is a bit like, well, what we know to be good for our health generally is actually typically good for your brain as well. Largely, if it's good for your heart, then it's usually going to be good for your brain as well. And what about specifically where people have looked at this in relation to people that have actually had a brain injury? Well, the literature there, the evidence is a bit smaller, less studies. But again, enough studies in the scientific literature that people have actually, again, been able to collect that information together. So indications that exercise can improve, again, cardiovascular health and balance, improve quality of life, reduce mild traumatic brain injury symptoms, improve mood, and again, promising results in relation to improving cognition. Now, it's not dramatic, it's not a panacea, it's not a magic bullet. But I guess it's that one of those things where thinking, well, anything little that can help is worth focusing on. Suddenly exercising is not going to dramatically improve your cognition, but it's not going to harm, and actually it may improve it a little. So overall, the body of evidence suggests that exercise is safe, easily implementable intervention for adults after a traumatic brain injury. It's important, of course, to emphasise that the benefit of getting support to plan an appropriate programme of exercise. So if you have physical difficulties, then it's always good to consult with an appropriate person to get advice on that. But the general message, And in a sense, it's not, it's a message we hear, all of us hear, don't we? And we all know we probably should be doing a bit more to improve our physical health. But maybe it's worth just highlighting that, well, if I'm exercising, it's not just my muscles that are benefiting, it's actually my brain. So what about connection? So when we think about connection, we think about social isolation and loneliness. Social isolation, again, decreased quantity and inadequate quality of social relations with other people. So it's important to think about when we talk about connection and things like social isolation and loneliness. It's not always just whether or not you have access to people, it's the quality of those relationships as well. And we know, again, it's not really surprising, is it? But we know that social isolation is associated with mental health problems, physical disease, and mortality risk in the general population. And cognitive, emotional, and physical difficulties after brain injury may reduce the opportunity for social participation. And that's the point I want to make, in a sense of all these things are interconnected, as we're highlighted in that one of those first slides. These things all interconnect with each other. And quite a lot of studies have reported that people often experience a decrease in the number of friends and frequency of social contact after brain injury. So in this particular study, this is work from my colleague Christian Salas and his group. They're based in Chile, in South America. And they worked with a group of brain injury survivors to try and understand and explore this relationship between social connection, mental health, quality of life, and so on. And in their study, they found that brain injury survivors presented with lower levels of emotional well-being and quality of life, and higher levels of depression, which we know happens. But they were particularly exploring this issue of the factor of loneliness and social isolation, and that certainly was associated with poorer quality of life, emotional well-being, depression, and anxiety. And again, just one final sort of study that I'll talk about. This is a study. It's a meta-synthesis. So what they've done here is they've taken this is 37 studies that have explored the experience of brain injury, but particularly that experience of social connection and isolation following brain injury. So in this paper, they've taken 37 different studies and then tried to sort of pull them all together and sort of summarize the results. And again, the results are not that surprising. I think you could probably have worked out what they might be, but it's worth just highlighting those. So again, across those studies, there's this finding that's common, that whilst initial gestures of support from friends post-injury were often noted by people with brain injury, individuals typically recounted that sort of painful realization that friendships, at least some friendships, faded with time. But they also talked about a struggle between a sort of desire to be understood and to have those close relationships, but often simultaneously feeling unable or finding it difficult to explain one's thoughts, so making it difficult to keep those connections and friendships going. But on the positive side, of course, that meaningful connections with others absolutely help to mitigate those feelings of isolation and then to improve mental well-being. Shared activities, particularly shared activities, certainly help build those connections. So where there are opportunities for shared activities, those are going to be great because they're going to help build connection. Reduces that feeling of loneliness and social isolation. That has a positive impact on mental health, and that has a positive impact on cognitive health. Another key thing that's always interesting, and it strikes me how this emerges a lot in this sort of literature, is that helping others often helps people to get a sense of meaningful engagement and reducing isolation. I think sometimes as healthcare professionals, we sort of think, oh, well, the task is just to help the person who's had a brain injury. But many people with brain injury, actually gain a huge amount from helping others, and that insight and experience that you gain from having gone through something like a brain injury. It's a huge amount of knowledge, of experience, and that perspective on life, which actually can be shared with other people with brain injury, but other people who may not have had that experience. So I know that for many people, that opportunity to, in a sense, to give, to volunteer, to help out, actually in itself is hugely positive and can help to reduce that isolation. So, and I think as part of that, in a sense, one of the things that people are often, I guess, grappling with after a brain injury is that sort of sense of rebuilding your identity. So understanding yourself, understanding how things, which parts of you, which elements of your identity, of yourself are common threads. They stay with you despite the changes that might occur after a brain injury. But some things change. Some things are going to be different, or those things that you can do may be different from what you did before. And often there's that struggle to balance who I was before the injury, who I am now, and finding the common ground. Things shift in different directions. But certainly social connections and social connection is a really important part of that journey to understand yourself and to be the new self post brain injury. And linked to this is this idea of social group membership. So this is some work by my colleague Kath Haslam, was at Exeter, is in Australia now. And this work is with a group of people who've survived a stroke. And one of the things they were interested in is looking at, and they sort of measured the number of sort of social group memberships that people had before their stroke and the extent to which they were able to maintain those social group memberships and connections. So we often all of us will probably be able to think of a few different sort of groups or sort of could be a family, it could be friends, it could be a sports club, could be a social club or whatever. But many people will have different little social group memberships. So they looked at that, as well as people's overall psychological well-being and life satisfaction, and a measure of cognitive difficulties. And what they found in exploring this with people who'd had a stroke was that certainly life satisfaction and well-being were significantly higher amongst individuals who had actually belonged to multiple social groups before the stroke, but also were able to maintain those group memberships post-stroke. And that benefit of multiple pre-stroke groups operated via a sort of social identity continuity. So, in a sense, for people who are able to stay connected to particular social groups, friends, family, and so on, post-stroke, that sense of continuity of who I am, I'm the same person. There's continuity of self, and that was really important to people's identity and to their sense of well-being. And again, cognitive failure, so having difficulties with cognitive functions, predicted poorer well-being, partly because they sort of disrupted people's ability to maintain those social group memberships. So for some people, it's going to be tricky. It's difficult to maintain those social group memberships because of cognitive or physical difficulties. It may not be possible. But again, for those of us who are supporting people after a brain injury, supporting people to either to develop new social group memberships highlights an important factor of how we should be thinking about things after a brain injury. So I've talked a little bit here about movement and why movement is important, why connection is important, and of course we're going to be hearing later about some things, and particularly things like dance, where in a sense we might say we're combining movement and connection in a really special way. And again, I'm just coming back to this slide really, because what I guess I want to go on to highlight is that when we're thinking about life after a brain injury and sort of rebuilding life after a brain injury, as I said, we need to think of life in the round, if you like. We've talked about cognitive functions, emotion and physical functions, which may be directly or indirectly affected by a brain injury. And they have impacts on someone's activities of daily living and so on. But part of this and part of that sort of relationship, so things like the physical functioning, such as and movement and social connection, which are potentially having a positive effect direct positive effect on cognition, or an indirect effect, because if we feel better, if we feel our mood is better, if our well-being is better, then that has a positive effect on cognitive functions. If you're depressed, it's harder to remember things. It's harder to concentrate. It's harder to do your work and so on. So thinking about both mental health and cognitive health, and indeed physical health, together after a brain injury is really important. So my message, as I say, I am just the warm-up guy for the next 2 sessions, which are going to be coming along next. But I guess the message I've tried to convey is, well, we know that movement and exercise is good for vascular brain health. It's good for our just general brain functioning, if you like, facilitating neuroplasticity, which is that sort of brain's adaptation to the injury, and is associated with better cognitive functions, mood, and well-being. We've got enough scientific evidence to just know that that's the case, if you like. Similarly, we've got enough scientific evidence to know that social isolation and the experience of loneliness are associated with depression, anxiety, and worse quality of life. So therefore, opportunities for movement and social connection are vital. So we're going to hear about examples of that from Leanne and Danielle in the next sessions. So I am going to leave it there. Thank you very much for listening. If there's any questions, that's fine.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was really, really interesting. Does anyone have any questions for Jonathan at all? There's one over here. I think someone's going to come with a microphone. Is there, Shannon?
Hi there, who's? Oh, hi, sorry.
Hello. It's not actually a question, it's more my personal reflection. I'm a nurse to trade. Well, I will be till start of August, when it's finished, courtesy of what happened a year ago, or 10 months ago. Spent the last 20 years doing AMP in Paisley, night shift, looking after, feels like millions of sick people over the last 30 odd years in various countries of the UK. What you put up there has been very reflective actually over the last, changed me, who apparently looks and sounds sort of the same, but I'm not the same by a mile. First few weeks of my admission, I was an adult with incapacity. It was a wee bit bonkers, and no memory. My memory starts coming together in a very nice ward here. In Queen Elizabeth. But my connection, massively important, that we're all used to stalling about our lives, connected, go to Scotland football games, run about with people from 40, 50 years ago, etc., the whole way through. When you're sitting in a side room for weeks, when you do remember why you're there, you're very isolated in a hospital environment. People come and see you, your family come and see you, your pals come and see you. Some of them get it, some of them didn't. All the staff come and deal with you and do what they have to do. And occasionally somebody will go up and above and beyond and actually speak to you. And it stands out a mile when that happens. From my journey, I'm sitting there going, why am I here? I didn't believe I had a brain injury. Amongst other stuff. And I didn't know what to do with myself. I'm sitting in this side room getting better. I graduated towards the physical aspect because that's been my whole life. Sorry for those of you that may be in the room, and I know there's some up the back, but apparently I didn't go too far down the line of all the other specialties. That's maybe putting it politely. My life changed when I went to the rehab unit. I was no longer sitting in a side room, what felt like an isolated person to me, but I had other people in the house. I had brain injury buddies. I had people you could speak to who could tell me how to go about things. Don't say this. Be like this to these people, etc., etc. And you had somebody to chat to. it's going to sound really daft, somebody to chat to who could guide you on your way. And when these people were telling me, for example, maybe they'd been in it, I'd worked several years in an ITU years ago, when they're telling me they've been there for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks in intensive care, I'm thought, you've got to put that up on top of the head injury. And connection is massive, because that then moves into movement. And my movement was find a place to fall against the wall and do my yoga that I used to be able to do.
Yeah.
And massively connected, but I would never really have put that all together, but the slides have really put it in. So I'm just saying thank you, I suppose. And
Thanks.
It's massively important and true.
Thanks very much. That's really kind of you. I think it's just picking up on a couple of things you said there. I mean, again, towards the beginning, you made that point that you're aware that you're still the same in lots of ways, but different, and that's something that everyone has to sort of grapple with. I'm different, I'm the same, I'm different, I'm the same sort of thing. It's that's something that's part of that journey, isn't it? And again, great that you're mentioning that importance of social connection, but also just again you're reminding us that, I like the way you put it, that in the acute ward where people going above and beyond to actually come and talk to you. It shouldn't really be above and beyond, but that's what it feels like. But again, it just reminds us that just how important that those social connections are right from the very beginning. And also you reminded us just how valuable it is talking to other people of, that shared experience thing. It's just so, whenever we run any groups or anything like that, just the opportunity to share things with people who've had the same experience. It's, in a sense, it's a universal sort of human thing, is that we really benefit from talking to people who have similar experiences. And that, if that's a brain injury, it's talking to people who've had a similar experience. Because as you say, people get it, and you know that they get it because they've gone through it. So, thank you.